Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
In today's program, we're going to begin to learn about the speech of Stephen to the Sanhedrin at the book of Acts. And we are exploring chapter 7. Chapter 7, I entitle it, Stephen's Anointed Speech and Death. Yes, at the end of the chapter, he will be a dead man because of this speech. And mind you, it's rather a remarkable speech to say the least. He's on trial, but he will use this speech to indict his accusers and the council which was hearing their accusations. So this is Stephen's speech, part 1. And he will focus on the patriarch Abraham. Now, of course, remember in chapter 6, Stephen is accused of blasphemy against God, against Moses and the law and the holy place. After all these things that brought him to the attention of the council, and these could be considered a capital crime for opposing these holy things, Stephen, in verse 1 of Acts 7, is given permission to speak. He's now going to be allowed to defend himself. But what we're going to see is that Stephen actually doesn't do anything of the kind in terms of defending himself. He is going to basically go on the offense. Now, I'm no expert in military things, but because we face a battle, we face a culture war, and we face a spiritual war, and sometimes we even face a normal, hot military war. But oftentimes, it's better to do the fighting on the enemy's territory than on one's own, because if you're on the home turf, you are fighting a defensive battle. But if you want to win, you've got to move the battle from your territory to that of the adversary. And that the best defense is a quick and preemptive offense. So Stephen is not going to talk about himself or whether he's guilty of blasphemy. He's going to come on the territory of the Sanhedrin, and by telling his people's history, which of course we read of in the Bible, he's going to indict them for the very things that they say he has done. Of course, he'll get them so infuriated that they'll lose their minds and throw stones to his death. So he's given permission to speak, but instead of saying these accusations are false, they're lying, I'm innocent, doesn't say anything of the kind. Now think of it, when Jesus faced the Sanhedrin, he didn't answer at all about the accusations given to him, and only under duress, because the high priest invoked the adjuring by the mighty God clause, which means no pious Jew can refuse to comment after such an invocation. So Christ then makes a simple statement that yes, he is the Messiah, and that brings his condemnation. In Stephen's case, he's going to give a lengthy speech, beginning with Abraham, and saying pretty much that God appeared to Abraham in Haran, or even before Haran, while Abraham still lived in Ur in Mesopotamia, and that God gives Abraham a simple command. Now remember, Abraham grew up in a polytheistic environment, but he's hearing from one God, he's hearing from the living God, and the living God is communicating directly with him and giving him a 5-word command. Get out of your country, meaning get out of ancient Ur of the Chaldees, which is, by the way, modern Iraq, and he's going to tell him eventually to go to the land that God has called him to. So there'll be a separation from land, a separation from loved ones, a separation from predictability, comfort, familiarity, and playing it safe. And Abraham's going to now go to a new land. And there'll be a list of events that happen in all this. Abraham will leave to go to Haran. Then he'll go from Haran to Canaan after his father Terah died. And even though Abraham, in obedience to God, arrives in the land of promise, He doesn't inherit a piece of land. He doesn't at this point have any children, though the covenant God made with him promised both land and children. But the battle plan, God did not leave Abraham in the dark. He said, look, your descendants will go to Egypt for 400 years. They will be oppressed. I will judge Egypt, and they will be delivered by a mighty hand. This is the beginning of the great story. Our lesson is entitled Stephen's Speech, Part 1, Abraham. And we'll be reading from Acts 7, verses 1 to 7. Then said the high priest, Are these things so? And he said, Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran, and said unto him, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans, and dwelt in Haran. And from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into this land wherein ye now dwell. And he gave him none inheritance in it, no, not so much as to set his foot on. Yet he promised that he would give it to him for a possession, and to his seed after him, when he was as yet had no child. And God spake on this wise, that his seed should sojourn in a strange land, and that they should bring them into bondage, and entreat them evil 400 years. And the nation to whom they shall be in bondage will I judge, said God, and after that shall they come forth and serve me in this place. This is Acts chapter 7, verses 1 to 7, and our lesson is entitled Stephen's Speech, Part 1, Abraham. Well, this is one of the famous speeches of the Bible. It does bring glory to God, although it does also bring condemnation and mob rule and rioting and death to Stephen. But it's interesting how he responds to it all, and it really is a magnanimous spiritual response. So let's begin with verse 1, permission to speak. After listening to the false accusations of himself, Stephen was now allowed by the council, the Jewish religious council called the Sanhedrin, to speak and see if these things were so. Now, unlike the trial of Jesus, where the Lord refused to speak, Stephen was more than willing. However, he doesn't seek at all to refute the charges that were made against him and to defend himself. But instead, he gives a speech about the history of his people, Israel. And remember, just as his opposers in chapter 6 of Acts could not refute or gainsay him in any way, they basically were in stunned silence, so the council will listen to the story of their people, given by Stephen the accused, also in intense silence. It says in verse 2 of Acts 7, God appears to Abraham. The council is reminded that while Abraham still lived in Mesopotamia, before he moved to Haran, which is located in southern Turkey, the God of glory appeared to him. Now please note, God was not appearing in the holy city. God did not make this divine appearance in a holy land. God actually makes the appearance in what would be considered a rebellious and unholy land. This is the place, perhaps, of the Tower of Babel, which was built on the foundation stones of rebellion against the living God. Or shall we say, Babylon was built on the quicksand of human rebellion. Not a good foundation for lasting growth. And now God, of course, appears to him, Abraham, in this polytheistic cosmopolitan milieu called Ur of the Chaldees. And, you know, the good thing is, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. God can appear anywhere. Anywhere, anytime. He is sovereign. He is the Lord. In other words, he's the boss. And there we have, in Acts 7, verse 3, the command of God. And remember that God's command to Abram, as I said earlier, was simple. Only 5 words. Get out of your country. Separate and leave your loved ones, and come to the land which I will show you. Now, according to Hebrews 11, verse 8, when God called Abraham to leave his country and go to a place that God would show him, he obeyed and left, and he did so very quickly. But it adds in Hebrews 11, even though he did not know where he was going. The reason for this is that we walk by faith and not by sight. I believe that reference is 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7. We walk by faith and not by sight. Now, it doesn't mean you walk blindly, and I do not like the phrase blind faith, as if faith is blind and those that are following in faith are equally blind. No, I believe faith has eyes, and faith sees him who is invisible, and faith sees the Lord, and sees the end result of the race we are told to run with patience in Hebrews 12. No, faith cannot possibly be blind. Faith has vision that the world knows nothing about. So Abraham, when he's told by God to get out of his country, he obeyed and left, though he did not know where he was going. He was guided by faith, and faith demands obedience to the clear commands of God. I cannot stress this enough. Faith responds immediately with obedience to the clear commands of God. Failure to respond is to be in disobedience to God. It is not an act of faith. And as the epistles tell us, anything that is not of faith is sin. After this is a list of events. In Acts 7, verse 4, it says that he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran, and thence when his father was dead, he removed him into this land wherein ye now dwell. So what are we looking at here at this list of events? In faithfulness to God, Abraham came out of the land of the Chaldeans. Now, he didn't leave alone. He left with his family and perhaps his staff, and I don't mean a staff like a shepherd, I mean his people who worked for him. So he leaves with his father, he lives with his wife, he leaves with others who are associated with him. It probably was an impressive entourage. Now, en route to Canaan, Abraham sojourns in Haran, which is in southern Syria, or actually northern Syria, southern Turkey. And they have these amazing cone-shaped mud huts in Haran. I visited the place a while back, and it's worth the effort if you can do so safely, but it is very close to the Syrian border. Now, Abraham basically did the boomerang route. From Ur to the Chaldees to Canaan, the land, it's actually west, due west. However, Abraham wisely chose to follow the Fertile Crescent, because if you just go due west from Ur to Canaan, you're going to encounter nothing but desert, and water supplies are exceedingly limited. And especially if you have an entourage, you need to do duty of care to make sure all the earthly needs are met. So instead, he goes northwest from Ur to Haran, and then eventually he goes southwest from Haran to Canaan. And the move from Haran to Canaan happened after the father of Abraham, Terah, was dead. His heathen father would not be with him when he entered the land of faith. So from here, in verse 5 of Acts 7, it talks about nothing. Abraham goes in faith, arrives in the land of promise, and he doesn't have anything. He doesn't have a descendant to care for his name, even though he's promised innumerable descendants as part of the covenant with God. Likewise, even though he's promised the land of Canaan as an everlasting inheritance for him and his descendants, he doesn't own 1 square meter of land. He is basically on a long-term tourist visa here in the land of promise. So basically, in summary, though the Abrahamic covenant promised land, descendants, and universal blessing, Abraham owned no land in Canaan, and for the longest time his wife was barren. So he moved to the land of Canaan in faith, but he had to wait for the promises to come to pass. Can I just say, if you have to wait for for something that's good and legitimate and from God, something the Lord has promised you, then take it as a compliment, first of all, that you are showing maturity. Because the immature can't wait for anything. But the mature are willing to wait because they know that God's best is worth the wait. But in addition, if you have to wait, it could be that God is doing a work in your life, making you well prepared for the blessing is about to bestow on you. Waiting on God is the lost art which needs to be recovered. Many benefits. There will be divine direction, divine provision, divine strengthening. Isaiah 40 verse 31, which I love to quote, as you wait on God, you will renew your strength. You will mount up with wings as eagles. You will run and not be weary, and you will walk and not faint. So if you have to wait, trust God that this wait is the best thing for you. And remember, you're not going to twiddle your thumbs while you wait. You will do whatever God puts in your hands to do for that time in order to see the kingdom of God extended. So there is a battle plan here in Acts 7 verse 6. God did not leave Abraham in the dark while he was waiting for land and waiting for descendants. He told him that his seed, the descendants, when it eventually came, would leave the land of Canaan and dwell in a strange land and be in bondage and evil for 400 years. That's probably why they didn't get too comfortable in the seat, because God was going to take the grandson of Abraham, namely Jacob, and move him to Egypt. And there was a reason for God doing this. The reason is that Egypt was a breadbasket, whereas Canaan was a drought and famine-prone death trap. But there was something else. Egypt had the room and the water and the pastures and the growing fields that the people of Israel, namely the sons of Jacob, 76 people who went down to Egypt after 400 years, they would be a nation of 600,000 military men, not counting women and children. That's why they had to go to Egypt for 400 years, so they could grow into a great nation, and as a great nation they would return to Canaan and conquer the land under the leadership of Joshua, the son of Nun. Finally, Acts 7 verse 7, judgment and deliverance. God promises that though Israel would be in bondage and evil for 400 years, the nation who enslaved the Hebrews, namely Egypt, would be judged. And after that, Abraham's seed would come out and serve God in the land of Israel. The deliverance from Egypt would be so impressive that Jewish people would observe this from 3,500 years ago, even until our day. Now, our lesson is entitled Stephen's Speech, Part 1, Abraham. And our lesson for life is this. The ancient Israelites had a keen sense of their history, and it would be good for us to do like this.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.